Hey guys, how you doing? It's Tom. I had a few thoughts that I wanted to get out. I was thinking about the release the Memo situation, which is really it's outlining just remarkable corruption, right? I mean, we have Hillary Clinton deletes 33,000 emails. We have a meeting on the tarmac between Loretta Lynch and Bill Clinton. We have a fake dossier made about the President of the United States of America, paid for in part by the two biggest political dynasties in modern American history, right? It started with the Bush family, then it got to the Clinton family, the Bush campaign to the Clinton campaign. Um, we have a spy ring being ran right out of Congress, Debbie Wasserman Schultz and the Awan brothers. We have 50,000 deleted text messages from an FBI agent who was one in charge of the Hillary Clinton investigation and her emails, well, not in charge, but in a high-ranking position, and then also took a high-ranking position in the investigation into Donald Trump's alleged Russian collusion. Now McCabe gets fired. He was involved in the Uranium One scandal. His role in that, his wife was running for a position, and money got funneled from the Hillary Clinton campaign through Terry McAuliffe to Andrew McCabe. And again, that's part of the bigger Uranium One scandal. We have hundreds of millions of dollars going to the Clinton Foundation. Frank Giestra, a Canadian businessman, connects everything with Uranium One. We have FBI documented Russian bribes in order to facilitate Russia's obtaining of the United States uranium supplies. I mean, this is remarkable corruption we're talking about, and it really corruption that extends through the entire government, to the deep state, all the way to the Bush family. Like I said, I can't de-stress enough the importance of it starting with the Bush family and getting to the Clinton family, because this is the bigger point that I wanted to make. So we see this massive corruption, right? And we're seeing it at a point where it's permeating through the entire government. And there's basically two classes of citizens at this point, right? There is the deep state, which seems to be able to operate completely beyond the law. I mean, it gets further than that, right? It's Edward Snowden's revelations. James Clapper, under oath, lied directly to the American people, said, no, the NSA does not spy on the American people. And turns out they do spy, and no one's held accountable except the whistleblower. I mean, we are talking about widespread, remarkable corruption across the United States government. And this got me thinking, and I was talking to my dad the other day, and it all connected. It all connected for me that this is a microcosm of everything that is wrong with government in the first place, especially when you have a government filled with unelected government bureaucracies. I mean, the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, they're not accountable to anybody. And even when you talk about regulatory agencies, I mean, the EPA, on its face, right, we should be able to have an environmental protection agency. The environment's important. But when you give the government power over anything, it becomes completely corrupt. So then the EPA gets used as part of UN Agenda 21, and the globalists who support that. Then the Environmental Protection Agency becomes the United States enforcement arm of UN Agenda 21, which is really about confiscating people's property. So it's like everything that government touches turns to corruption. And why is that? Well, I was explaining the situation with the vast number of pedophiles that are in the American government, and we've discussed that at length on this channel. You have people like Anthony Weiner. In the last 12 to 18 months, there has been over 10 mayors arrested or charged with pedophilia. It's really rampant throughout the government. If you watch my report on Jerry Sandusky, he wasn't an isolated guy. He was part of a larger pedophile ring that connected through Pennsylvania Congressman Ed Rendell, billionaire businessman Ed Savitz. Lawrence King was a Republican congressman. So really, it connected through all out the American government. But when the media reported it, they reported, oh, Jerry Sandusky, a lone pedophile. So with that and the 10 mayors, you have pedophiles all over the American government. And my father asked me, Tom, how does this happen? He doesn't dig like I do. So I was trying to explain. Well, the best way I could explain it is, say a bad person gets into power. Someone who's very corrupt, with evil intentions, worried about money, worried about power. Maybe they're worried about eugenics. Who knows? And if you research your history on eugenics, you know that the Nazis weren't the group that came up with the idea of eugenics. That was actually born in America. And if you really want to know how this country operates and what has driven the country for the last 100 years, do some Googling about the Rockefellers, Aldous Huxley. Read A Brave New World. It's a great book that could really help wake you up. But it really, you really need to understand the eugenics in order to understand the history of America. So, say you get these really evil people into positions of power, and now they're in charge of staffing a government bureaucracy or something of that nature, and they're in charge of this appointment and that appointment. Well, what do you do if you're really evil? Well, the one thing you don't do is appoint Captain America, right? Because if you appoint Captain America, every now and then one of those get through, like Edward Snowden, then you get exposed for being criminals. So instead, what these criminals do once they get into positions of power, and whenever power is available, it is inevitable. In the end, even if the person of your dreams becomes president, well, eventually, 4 years later, 8 years later, 12 years later, 16 years later, it doesn't matter. Eventually, an evil person is going to take that position. President's the easy example, but even if you're talking about eventually there is a president who is corrupt, which we've had plenty, LBJ, Woodrow Wilson, we could go all through history with that, and of course, seemingly all of the modern presidents. But what they're going to do is appoint people they know are dirty. Because if you know they're dirty, they're protecting themselves. So let's just say top of the line, president appoints someone to one position, whatever it might be. And I'm simplifying things, but it's for the grander point that I'm making. So then maybe that's the head of the CIA, whatever it might be. So the head of the CIA is now corrupt, and he's going to make sure a number two person is, you guessed it, corrupt. And the number two person is going to make sure the number three person is corrupt. And they're doing this to protect themselves. And yes, don't get me wrong, there are patriots all over the American government. In fact, I believe there are more patriots by far in the American government than there are corrupt people, believe it or not. But the hierarchy becomes corrupt. And as long as it's corrupt from the top, which it only takes so many people, and it's inevitable that these corrupt people are going to be put in these positions of power because the people above them are corrupt and want to protect themselves. So what we're seeing right now in the American government is the deep state, as it's referred to. We're seeing it on really the deepest level, right? This stuff comes from the Council on Foreign Relations. This is where they're the kingmakers, and politicians go there, and if they say the right things, have the right belief systems, it might not even be, in all cases, that they're evil intentioned, but they're going to promote people that fit the overall agenda of the people that hold power. So again, it comes through the Council on Foreign Relations, these type of think tank groups, and over time you get all these important positions filled by corrupt people. Now, imagine if this takes place, because we're thinking on a small scale, but imagine if this takes place starting in the 1980s. and it goes 10 years of corrupt people. In the 1990s, 20 years of corrupt people. 2000s, 30 years of corrupt people. 2017, 37 years of corrupt people being put into positions of power because they're being put into those positions by other corrupt people. Would you say the American government has been corrupt for the last 37 years? Because I certainly would. I mean, we're talking about Reagan to Bush, although I actually do like Ronald Reagan. But really, we're talking about the Bush 1, we're talking about Bill Clinton, we're talking about Bush 2, and we're talking about Barack Obama. That is many, many, many years of very corrupt political dynasties putting their corrupt agents into place. Now, of course, corruption in the American government goes way, way back past just these 37 years. But in terms of the people that are there now that infest the United States government, this has been building for a long time, right? It's like an ingrown hair, and you don't treat it, and it just gets pus and pus and pus and pus. And the United States government is just one big pile of pus. And we need to drain the swamp, which is why Release the Memo is a very exciting thing. But the bigger point I wanted to make here is that this is how it happens, and this is the problem with the very nature of having national government. This is why power needs to be localized and checked. State power is better than national power. Local power is better than state power, because the more you centralize this power, the more you open it up, not just for corruption, for what will inevitably become pus of corruption. Decades and decades and decades of people with bad intentions putting people with bad intentions into the positions of power. We have to shrink the size of government. This isn't about the right people. Even if the right people are in place now, even if the right people are in place 4 years from now, 8 years from now, until this system changes, we're going to see this systemic corruption in the United States government. And what are the options for changing that system? You could go the Bernie Sanders way, but what that is referring to is, or what that does is it makes government bigger. It actually plays into the system because you're expanding the power. I mean, just the taxation alone is the very nature of taxation. Do you really think we have, generally speaking, much choice in our federal elections? There is no choice. It is no different than a king, a monarch like the King of England that we broke free from. It is no different from that when we are getting taxed on the federal level by the federal government, something that our founding fathers didn't put into place. This didn't happen until 1913. And of course it happened in 1913 because big bankers, Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, J.P. Morgan, they got together on Jekyll Island. They had a meeting. There's a book you could read all about this, The Creature from Jekyll Island. A second look at the Federal Reserve. I strongly recommend you read it. But these bankers got together and they bought off enough congressmen. Nelson Aldrich Rockefeller was actually married into the Rockefeller family. He introduced the bill. And they introduced the bill, and then they created a monopoly over the nation's money supply, and the corruption, it just goes on and on from there if you want to dig. So we have this tyrannical system, no different from a King of England that we broke free from in 1776 when Thomas Paine wrote Common Sense. It's still common sense now. We took a tyrant 3,000 miles away and we made it one big conglomerate of tyrants because people keep succumbing to fear. Because people have fear. They fear of going broke. They fear of being hungry. They fear of whatever it might be, and the government uses that fear. including through racial division. The government uses that fear, and their response to that is always to expand the power of government. It's called the Hegelian dialectic, right? Create a problem, the government creates the problem, or uses natural problems, right? If natural problems are available, the government will use them. But if they're not, the government creates problems. And then they have a predictable reaction from the public. And then the government comes in with a solution. And the power expands. So the two ways you can go. You go the Bernie Sanders way. You could expand the power, give the conglomerate of corruption, the pus ball, more ability to tax. And of course, taking further control of the United States education system. Because nothing comes free, even if it's sold to you as free. Or we can go in a different direction. Take the politicians out of it. Take Trump out of this. Take everyone out of this. And the direction we could go is toward individual liberty. Getting back to the Constitution. Getting back to the country's foundation, where government power was limited, where we didn't need this big welfare state to take care of us, because that only feeds the government's power. Where we don't need this military-industrial complex to wage wars all over the world. Step out of your own shoes for a second. Step out of your own shoes. Are citizens of countries all over the world, do they wake up and find it to be a norm that their country has army bases all over the world, that their country has troops on the ground in other countries all over the world, that their country is dropping bombs in other countries all over the world? This is the cultural paradigm that we're born into. This is our cultural norm. And then you hear Americans so ignorant. Why do people all around the world hate us? Because we're an empire. It's an American empire. Because it's not individuals, but it's a conglomerate of power. And it all ties in. And it's this massive welfare state. And it's this massive military-industrial complex. Because we're giving them too much power. And the nature of power, as I explained, dictates that over a long period of time, bad people with bad intentions will get into positions of power, and they will fill the important positions around them with other corrupt people. We are choosing to be ruled by tyrants, and we do have a choice. We have a choice, but we are so controlled by fear. We are so indoctrinated through our government-controlled education system that teaches us that we need a welfare state, that takes away our ability to think freely. 1/3 of all American jobs, think about this, 1/3 of all American jobs require a government license. You have to go to college to get those licenses a great deal of the time. So you have to go to college. And you have to take on $200,000 in debt. And the reason you have to do that is because you have to play in the government system. And it's a cycle. You need the degree to get the job. And the government controls where you get the degree. It's a system of indoctrination. A system that inevitably leads to people completely controlled by propaganda. If you've read about the Church Committee, you have the CIA back in up to the 1970s had paid billions of dollars in today's money to infiltrate the American media, to pay journalists in the American media to push propaganda. Billions of dollars. We are going to government schools because we're forced to, because we need government license to get government jobs. All of this is driving the prices up. We're brainwashed by the government's indoctrination system, known as the federal education system. And then we're subjected to their propaganda. Propaganda that its tentacles reach deep into Hollywood. Did you watch the Grammy Awards last night? The entire show was devoted to anti-Trump propaganda. Notice that everything's always about race. Everything's always about isms, sexism, xenophobia. Because they want you to assume intentions behind policies rather than debate and understand the policies themselves. We have to wake up. We are under the control of a paradigm of malicious, incredible power that we have created because we have succumbed to fear, starting with the Federal Reserve, to the New Deal, to the Great Society, to almost every war we have been into that has been started under the pretense of a false flag, from the sinking of the Lusitania, to the Gulf of Tonkin in Vietnam, to babies in incubators to get us into the Gulf War. You do your own research on 9/11. We are ruled by fear. We beg the government to take care of us. But the government doesn't take care of us. They enslave us. Because what was true at the beginning is still true today. He who is willing to sacrifice liberty for security will end up with neither.